to navigate the affairs of the day. Now, usually it's something that has made headlines on a national level. This morning, we are stepping away from the borders of Uganda and looking within the confinement of the East African region with the member states and the different geopolitics that is moving highs and lows, including the conflicts in Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, and South Sudan, as we are seeing. I am Priscilla Regina Naloga. Welcome to our Kickstarter. This morning we'll be focusing on the quest for regional peace and bilateral cooperation, as well as the patterns of regional integration in the East African community. Uganda having been running errands across the region and the continent. Recently, you've been seeing President Museveni on plane or receiving heads of state, signing around 8 agreements with Ethiopia and also mediating peace in South Sudan and meeting up with President of Somalia to discuss peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo conflict. And of course, today we get to speak on these regional and continental issues with experts on the subject matter. To my extreme left, we do have Tolit, who has been with us in NTV newsroom, giving us a perspective, especially with the Democratic Republic of Congo issue. And now this morning we'll be speaking to regional politics. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Priscilla.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
One would wonder, we usually see celebrities wearing glasses like that at such hours of the day. And so does that make you a celebrity in northern Uganda?
No.
All right. Deputy RCC now in Wakiso district, Sheikh Kassim Kamugisha, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Regina, and good morning, viewers.
How is Wakiso?
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
All right. Now, we start off by looking at a trip that President Museveni made to South Sudan most recently. And this was over the conflict between President Salva Kiir and his first Vice President, Riek Machar. First of all, it begs the question, how important was it that President Museveni go to South Sudan and have this meeting at such a time as this, when there's rising tension between the two leaders in South Sudan? I'll start with you, Tolit.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think it is very important that His Excellency President Museveni makes that trip, particularly as head of state in any country in terms of foreign affairs, international relations. The sitting president is actually the chief minister of foreign affairs. Events arising shortly after this visit were of a nature that would create what you call a diplomatic debacle. We were getting a lot of feeds from the media, and some were qualified statements, because, for instance, the minister, think of State for Defense of Southern Sudan, made a statement of a press conference in relation to the visit of the veteran and what do you call statesman, elder, leader, Jaramogi Odinga, who had been sent as a special envoy by President Ruto to meet the leaders of Southern Sudan, given what was unfolding. Now, this region is a very dynamic region and very volatile. It's actually a region that it lives in unrest, it lives in anxiety. And the 3 quick things I want to point out here, just to put the geopolitics in perspective, is after the colonial era, this is the only region that has produced 2 new states. We have Eritrea in 1991. We have Southern Sudan coming in 2021. This is also an interesting geopolitical location and confluence, because this is the region where I think it offers the greater meeting of Christians and Muslims in one geographical location. So, with what is going on in Sudan, Southern Sudan, the statements that came out of Ethiopia to the effect that they were actually paranoid about our deployment in Southern Sudan. And there was an official statement to the effect that probably our deployment was not helping the situation. It only went to escalate the situation. President Ruto is equally an active, an agile, and an ambitious president in the region. And we saw that currently, as chairman of the East African Community, he made a very quick response. He sent Elder Jaramogi Oginga Odinga to Juba. And we know that in Juba, Jaramogi coming out says he only spoke to President Salva Kiir and was denied an opportunity to speak to the first Vice President, Riek Machar. Now, in a political contestation like that one, with very high triggers on political and security dynamics within the region, it is important that when you go to intervene, you should be seen to be as neutral as possible. So getting out without speaking to Riek Machar raised a lot of questions. And when he came out to the press, he actually said he was asked to come to Kampala to seek permission, if he was quoted correctly. So these raise interesting tensions. So seeing President Museveni rush to Juba, one is that we have been friends with Southern Sudan for a long time, right from the quest of their push to self-determination and our own LRA conflict. But also, too, that President Museveni, as an elder statesman and a strong man in the region, and also given the fact that recent events with the Rwanda, with the Congo, seemed to have portrayed him like a man who was beginning to lose grip of the region. And many think, and naturally so, that probably at 80, or so to speak, people begin to slow down. So I think his rush to Juba has altered a number of things in the scene. One, he has reinstated his credentials as senior statesman and probably a man with influence in the region. That is yet to be tested. The other one is that the region, as I have stated, with the emergency of Eritrea as a small state, a new state, and with the tensions with Ethiopia, Southern Sudan with us, and with the tensions in Southern Sudan, the dynamism, the volatility, the interest of the international, first of all, the change of landscape in the international world. Look at what is happening in America with an inward-looking attitude, the emergence of new powers, political and economic, and there are many, some very close to us, as the UAE, Turkey, India, that we've had a long relationship with. All these definitely demand that the individual statesmen in the East Africa and the Horn cannot afford sleep. Okay. Because they are trading on tenterhooks.
All right, speaking of treading on tenterhooks, South Sudan is definitely also trending. Their attention, it's taking it away from the Democratic Republic of Congo. We've been seeing East African communities, SADC, and even the Arab world coming in to help mediate and bring to negotiations what is happening and put to peace what's happening in the eastern side of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, suddenly we also have to pay attention to South Sudan, and in just a short while, you are seeing the case of President William Ruto having to send his envoy, and of course, what Tolit has alluded to transpired that Raila Odinga had to then make a trip to Kampala to get quote-unquote a permission. As if that's not enough, you also do have the African Union envoy having come in to be able to look into the matters and affairs and advise accordingly as an African oversight organization. But then also we do have the case of the relationship that Uganda and South Sudan do have share currently with the two heads of state. And so it begs the question, what is the significance of all this amalgamating to actually result into possible peace in the nearest future?
Well, first and foremost, I wanted to add one thing to Doctor's submission in terms of President Museveni's trip to South Sudan. I don't call it a rush. I think it is an affirmation of what the current government of Uganda believes in terms of the principles. And the second principle, of course, is Pan-Africanism. And Pan-Africanism, of course, demands that African problems, African solutions, championed by African leadership. So President Museveni's travel to South Sudan was in fulfillment of the Pan-African principle that Sudan is a brother, the people of South Sudan are brothers, and therefore what affects them affects us as Africa and Uganda. So I depart a bit from using the word rush to a need, which was necessary. Now, of course, with these various players and power centers coming to manage and, of course, direct objectively the way the conflict should end is really called for, because at the first collision between the two towering giants in South Sudan, we had losses of lives, we had losses of properties, but also we had the outflow of the populations of South Sudan into Uganda, and therefore calling for an effort from Uganda to avert the same. We had an influx to Congo, then of course the Arab world and all this. And therefore this calls for every effort to avert the possible situation necessary. Two, there is no country in the world that is operating in isolation. Whatever happens in one country has got a spillover to either a region, a continent, or even the world. If you have got to destabilize South Sudan, it means there is a bigger problem to the whole region of East Africa. One, that means you don't have control over the flow of firearms. And so a firearm outside Sudan is potentially dangerous to Uganda, to the Middle East. Now, you have got to destabilize South Sudan, then you have got to destabilize the market for the East African products. And so Kenya won't sell South Sudan, Uganda won't sell. And so it calls for the East African community to come and say, look here, what are we losing in the long run? You have got to destabilize South Sudan, but at the same time you have got the Middle East. You have got Syria, you have got Iraq, where there is a very big problem. And here, these are people who share the same, almost the same language, and the same, because he called it the confluence of Islam and Christianity. So they share something in common in terms of religion, but also in terms of theological difference. So therefore, every effort to ensure that we have got peace in South Sudan from any player in the world is called for, because a stabilized Sudan is a stabilized Africa, stabilized African community. However, I'm very proud that we are now looking at South Sudan as our own problem as Africa. In the past, you would be seeing the United Nations Security Council taking lead. But today you have got the African Union. I was happy when the panel of the wise got involved in the conflict. Yes, we have not seen a tangible result as of now, but I think we have seen an escalation as we speak of today. Whereas the second...
And a more immediate response.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is out of Africa, the African Union, not the UN, which had been the norm. So Africa is trying to assert itself and its influence in that, whereas we have been dependent on you, we can also come in now without you and do something that is tangible and appreciated by the world. Secondly, of course, the flying of Odinga from Nairobi to Juba, then to Kampala, to me, I think it is an appreciated effort. Because one, he was able to fly, representing the chairperson of the East African Community Bloc. And whether the message was delivered to the two players or not, but he made a stamp. Went there, then coming back to Kampala, as you said in the quotes, for what I can't substantiate on air, I think is also a positive, it is a positive indicator that there is a will, first of all, from President Salva Kiir, because he would have said, what have you come to do? But the fact that he accepted to have a meeting with him and there was a discussion, then there is a will to de-escalate the situation in South Sudan. So I really give credit. But also, President Museveni's trip, in my view, gives confidence to our boys who are deployed in South Sudan. Because, of course, the deployment had many issues, but as a commander-in-chief, flying there is saying, we are here to ensure that the East African community does not disintegrate. Because the problems which were there before the East African community, the problems which were there before President Museveni became a president, were two or three. One, the whole region was disintegrated. At 1986, you had conflicts everywhere. But also you had competition based on ethnicity. You had Rwanda, whereby you had the Tutsis and Hutu looking at each other with almost a killing eye. Then you had, of course, South Sudan, you had the blacks, the southern Sudan Christian blacks fighting against the northern Arabs. Then you had, of course, the DRC, the Eastern DRC also crashes on ethnicity. But as of today, Rwanda is pacified. Actually, Burundi is pacified. Rwanda is pacified. And South Sudan is also consolidating itself as an independent state. And President Museveni has made efforts in all these pacifications, including stabilizing security through IGAD, then East African Community, because I think it's the only pioneer doctor remaining as per the 1999 team. So I think he has really played his role in the region, and this is something we can't really neglect to see and appreciate.
Speaking of roles being played in the region, let's talk about the role of the East African community and what it should be playing in the region, especially where we see things right now. Of course, South Sudan has come into, but picking a leaf from the Democratic Republic of Congo, you do have former President Kenyatta being sent to actually help the two leaders come to table and talk about the conflict in Eastern DRC. That not really bearing fruit. Okay, let me say not bearing fruit yet. And yet you see an external power, Saudi Arabia, coming and actually calling two leaders that are refusing to meet within the region on the same table and have a discussion. Where does, one time you and I talked and you mentioned the big brother syndrome and whether in East Africa we actually still have any big brother influencing syndrome, and where does it leave all the gap that it leaves in its absence, giving other superpowers the position to actually play the big brother role, Tolit?
Yeah, you see, the whole theoretical concept of the big brother syndrome arises from an analysis of scenarios across the world. There have been conflicts in the world. The conflict we're seeing is not the very first. There have actually been conflicts of very similar typology. Some of them, in a way, actually looked more unprotracted wars. But eventually they came to an end. I'll give you an example. Look at the Irish War, the North, the two Irish, the North and then the South, pretty much tied around religion. There was a conflict with an island in Indonesia that sought secession. That conflict was managed quite well, and a couple of others. The Palestinian-Israel war has gone through so many phases, in spite of the conflict we're seeing now. But there have been a number of settlements reached. So there is some pattern to settlements that has been studied, reviewed, established, that we can try to pay attention to. And in all these, you find that particularly where conflict has degenerated into violence, in terms of conflict management theorizing, you need to reach a point where a stage that is defined as balance of power. Before you strike balance of power, sometimes it's not possible to have people talk, because people need to reach a point where everybody realizes, by use of force, I cannot win this war, and therefore let us resort to other means. And these means then should have a third party come to try and exploit them by encouraging the protagonists to pick interest in them. And this is where the big brother syndrome comes in. But it also does not vainly come just as plainly as I'm trying to explain. There are other ingredients that he should come along with. So, for instance, we talked about Qatar. I know that in the inner woods, what happened is that planes were dispatched, for these two gentlemen. They woke up and there were planes at their runways for each of them to pick, already paid for and everything. Now, this is particularly where the regional bodies, particularly the East Africa community, and the East Africa community, by the way, interestingly, in Africa, is one of the most viable regional bodies. And that is the paradox around it. And that's why sometimes when we are punching hard, we're simply saying, you have shown capability to deliver. Why don't you just then cross the line and deliver? Because we seem to see cohesion, we seem to see cooperation amongst the leaders, and they are speaking. But unfortunately, the integration seems to be an integration and cohesion of leaders. Beneath, you just quickly fall into, into a cold bath. The citizens seem to have been left out of this whole thing. And this is where I even have problems with this diplomatic shuttling we are seeing. Because let's take Southern Sudan and stay with it. Southern Sudan, as we are speaking now, is entrapped with a number of internal challenges which are related to their politics and their governance issues. It is important that if anybody is intervening, then they are only creating a condition that allows the leaders of Southern Sudan to go and address the pertinent, political and governance issues. I'll tell you one. The President Salva Kiir, who unfortunately, in terms of global perception and regional perception, Uganda seems to be seen to be siding with him singularly as a man and as a leader, country. Not as the country. And yet, internal critics and scholars have pointed out that the man has actually found comfort in running away from the 2018 agreement. And that agreement is basically the hallmark of the return of peace, security, and stability to Southern Sudan. Mm-hmm. I'll just point out three things. One, there is the issue of to the election, to their intended election. There's the issue of having an acceptable general population census. There is a whole huge dispute on how this should be done. Two, there were fundamental state management issues that they agreed on in that 2018 agreement. One of them being a portion of ministries going to the SPLA in opposition. That has been flouted. Not once, not twice, but severally. He has even gone ahead to arrest ministers of IO under questionable circumstances. There has been an ongoing, an alternative peace, political peace dialogue, which was initiated by President Ruto, called the Tumaini talks, which have been going on in Nairobi. They became difficult to the extent that at some point they were shifted from Nairobi to Italy. Reason being that there was a lot of interference by Salva Kiir. A number of SPLA IO delegates were kidnapped from the city of Nairobi and without any proper explanations. Some of them were later on discovered in dungeon cells in Juba. Now, all these compromise the integrity of a negotiation. Okay. Now, back to the point. The whole idea, and I like when the good Haji is pointing at African solutions, it goes back to this whole notion of regionalism. The posturing is big, but the actual actions. Because if you're going to have a homegrown solution, then you should be able to also fund them. The East Africa community, as we see it now, even the member states are failing to pay membership. So what is the political commitment? It would be one thing to say we don't have money, but we have seen studies and research showing that there is such lumpen luxury and huge cost expenditure in the administration to maintain these states. Okay. Not only Uganda, not only Rwanda, not only Sudan, not only, So political commitment is an issue. So three things. The notion of statism, as it is, classical statism, that, let's organize, let's go into elections. Elections have been a sham. Let's go into, let's talk about equitability, because the relationship between the rich and the poor in many of these states is very fragile. Okay. And therefore we have a structural problem. So even as Uganda, we might seem to have some form of peace, but for me, it is basically a lie.
All right, the spirit of Pan-Africanism versus the spirit of East Africa, Sheikh Kassim. You look at the East African community having collapsed back in 1977, and then it was revived in 2000. But its collapse was simply because of, I think, what Tolit is referring to, the dominance by one particular state. At that time, it was Kenya, and we seem to be seeing a repeat of events. It begs the question, wherein lies the strength of a regional bodies such as these to manage situations, especially as far as those that are interfering with the regional peace are concerned?
Regina, there is no single factor that can expressly confirm the collapse of the East African community in 1977. It must have been a multiplicity of factors, and then, of course, the in quotes, political dominance of Kenya, maybe Kenya's blackmailed and then the collapse. But the East African community of 1967-77 is quite different from the East African community of today. We are talking about the original 3 countries, and here we are talking about around eight countries forming a bloc. With the bigger population, then you have got the parity purchasing power, quite big, of approximately $470 US dollars and billions. So there is quite a very big difference. And to answer your question, the strength does not lie in individual states now. The strength, in my view, lies in the will and commitment already shown. The bigger objective of the East African bloc is not about, in my view, political confederation, because then they would have started with that. I think that the big objective is how do we have a bloc with an improved lifestyle and livelihood of the people. And that is why the East African community has begun from a point, for example, free movement of goods and services, with, of course, a few hurdles along the way. You have students who can now move from Uganda to Kenya simply because they are carrying a valid student identity card. You can cross from Katuna to Gatuna in Rwanda because you have got a national identity card of Uganda. And to me, that facilitates trade. That facilitates the movement of services. And therefore, that gives people economic emancipation. And number 2, you've seen a deliberate move by the East African Chief of Defense Forces, of course with permissions from the commanding-chiefs of their countries, moving to say, why don't we have a standby East African Defense Force? Whereas it was rejected in Congo because of various citations. But there is an effort to have that standby force, meaning that they are speaking to the security of the East African community, East African bloc, and therefore putting the strength in a unified force, not necessarily in a force of a country. But also, we are seeing our movement towards, from the protocols and discussions, towards a single currency. And of course, this speaks to, of course, with disparities in our economic strength as countries, because Kenya is quite strong, Tanzania is bigger, but there is a will to have a common currency for the East African community. Therefore, that would be putting the strength outside individual state, but into the whole bloc. And so I would think that whereas the dominance of Kenya then, and of course the judgment by other states could explain why the community then collapsed, I don't think it will be the same situation as of now, because I think we are trying to build foundations for the bloc, not necessarily individuals for the bloc. I want to think that if the collapse of East African community now was to be hinged on leaders, then it would have collapsed, because the founder the members who renewed the East African community by 1999 and 2000 have almost died, apart from, or have almost left the scene, apart from the serving president of the Republic of Uganda. And so I'm confident that even if he left the scene...
That's why it is in one man's hand now.
No, well, it's an opinion. It's an opinion, but I believe that even if he left the stage tonight, the East African community has got a foundation where it can ride on. That is why President Ruto is the chairperson of the East African community, and you are seeing him putting an effort of sending his great statesman to go and mediate, meaning that the absence of some players does not stop others from taking the mantle ahead. So, whereas we should have fears, but our fears should be really raised by the fact that there are institutions being built, foundations being built for the survival of the East African community. I want to agree with you that indeed the people seem to be aloof from the champions of the whole architecture, and it raises concerns that will the people ultimately accept, especially with our diverse ethnicities, our diverse languages, and of course our disparities in terms of the economic power.
Okay.
So I agree with you that the East African community bloc discussion should filter down to the ordinary man. Though me and Doctor would agree that the ordinary man might not very quickly perceive the strategic engagements as they are moving. But it's also important that discussions begin tickling down so that we all own that if I meet a Rwandan, for example, in Kabale, I should not look at him as a Rwandan. I should accept him as an East African. If a South Sudanese is crossing into, should not be seen as a refugee, should be seen as an East African who is moving within their area. So the whole discussion has to be scaled down.
All right. Speaking of scaling, let's look at another new state member in the East African bloc, Somalia, that is also building relations, of course, with the community, but also individual states, Uganda to be exact. We have seen the president of Somalia making trips to Uganda in most recent times, twice, you know, if we can say back to back. And there's the bilateral coordination that is happening in between there. But at the same time, our relation with Somalia, with ATMIS, also puts us in a position of the bilateral relations, you know, growing and building between the two countries. It begs the question, what is the positioning of Somalia for Uganda, but also on the East African community scale, Tolit?
Yeah, you see, I at some point illustrated to you the factors that make the East Africa and the Horn an interesting geopolitical space. And I basically had looked at the arrival of the post-colonial states, the geographical the geographical position of East Africa and the Horn, religion, but there are nuances to it. For instance, especially the Horn, including Somalia. Somalia, by the way, has the longest coastline that touches the Red Sea and almost the Mediterranean. And therefore, it creates a very unique advantage and access to the Middle East. And it also has a long history with the Middle East and states like Turkey, Egypt, which are now seen as new powers. There is the issue of the global fight on terrorism that has sort of condescended within Somalia, and what we saw with the fall of Saidi Barre, and there's also another interesting nuance with the fall of Saidi Barre, because Saidi Barre, when he was there, he largely cooperated with the Soviet. His immediate fall ushered in I mean, he cooperated with the Americans, and his immediate fall ushered in the Soviets, the Soviet dominance. And of course, remember that has linkages with the collapse of the unipolar world. Now, having said that, we see Somalia caught up in this insecurity, if you like, for years. Uganda actually has been in Somalia now 30 years. Uganda went to Somalia in 2007, and we are still there. How much traction have we made? Have we had? We have made a lot of gains. We have impacted Somalia, but we have also almost in equal proportion made huge losses and also lost on the front of influence. The President Sheikh, who comes here the other day, is actually a second time president of Somalia. He was the president just at the heel of their first political arrangement in 2013. He lost it, then he comes back now. He comes back, and they now front for the East African community, which in the face of peace and security, I welcome, because then it sort of expands the buffer, like Haji says. And one thing that the East African community has done or achieved, especially with the regional stabilization force, with the force, the standby force, and the attitude of the leaders, especially President Museveni, which has been forceful, is that we have gained some form of peace and stability, in the region, in spite of the volatility. But beyond that, what still misses is the question of moving away again, as I said, from the classical state arrangements, to begin to cast an eye and ask yourself, how do we actually attain actual peace and security, stability, architecture through nation building? Because in spite of the fact that Somalia is a member of the East African community and can rely, it sort of buffers its security prospects with forces in the region. At the moment, with the new arrangement of ATMIS, I think there is only Uganda, Burundi, and Kenya. But we have 8 states, and it can benefit from all these given the arrangements. But you see, that does not take away the internal squabbles and challenges that are rocking the political arrangement. And that can only be achieved through a clear indigenous process of nation building, other than entrenching the element of statism. Because we can cooperate with Sheikh, we can give him all the peace, we have forces there. Largely we are looking at the Al-Shabaab. Okay. And that brings a bit of stability. But we can, as non-Somali, as non-indigenous people, looking at the post-Westphalia agreements around sovereignty, we cannot indulge in the internal politics of Somalia.
That's why I would like to bring in Kassim here and ask ourselves the question of our peace-building relationship with Somalia was way long before Somalia was part of the East African Community bloc. And so it begs the question that since we have seen significant strides towards peace establishment and maintenance or stability within Somalia as a country, why do we still have legs and boots in Somalia, of course through the different mission groups that are there? What other interests are there for us as Uganda versus East Africa?
To really put into perspective your question, we have to reflect back at 1991, at the fall of Said Barre. Then, of course, the international community coming in with Aliyun Mahdi, who was rejected directly by General Farai, and then the country is plunged into what we are seeing today. That is not cast in the stone. It can resurface as of today. And so what players have brought Somalia to where it is today, that you can have a flight from anywhere in the world, you land in Mogadishu, and you fly out safely. It's a collective effort where Uganda is seen to be taking lead from the East African, from the ATMIS perspective. Now, with the Al-Shabaab still controlling some areas, with dissenting voices still existent in Somalia, and with, of course, the fall of Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, then another player comes in, then he falls out and Hassan comes in, speaks to the fact that there is need to support the efforts within Somalia, but also to consolidate the gains. Now, consolidating the gains means a two-way approach. One, helping Somalia to build internal cohesion through dialogue, but also helping Somalia to build its own indigenous institutions. For example, the army, foreign service, intelligence. So by the time you leave, you are sure that the country can sustain itself. Now, the question is, has Somalia attained that level that if Uganda left today, the country is able to move without the support, without AWSOM, without ATMIS? To me, the answer is no. Number two, the presence of Uganda, for example, in Somalia is not because Uganda is in Somalia, but Uganda is combating a global catastrophe of terrorism. And has this terrorism...
But Priscilla, if you might, maybe Haji, why don't you exploit that question completely? 30 years we've invested, it has come to naught.
Yes.
If you are a frugal businessman, looking at applying cost-benefit analysis lenses and all these other, is there still need to spend money on that venture?
You see, Doctor, me and you will have various routes to Nairobi. You can move by road, I can fly, but we shall all be in Nairobi. So you would want to see Uganda out today, which is good, but if we are out today, are we done with the global catastrophe of terrorism? No, Al-Shabaab is still rampant everywhere. So you need to ensure that when you are out today...
And our intervention has made sure that Somalia actually has its own version of Al-Shabaab.
Well, I wanted to come to your point of nation building. From all this, I wanted to come back to your point, because I agree with that we should actually begin refocusing our energies towards empowering the people of Somalia to take charge of their own affairs.
Which is the role of the community, not Uganda?
No, you see, the security apparatuses play a key role. He's from northern Uganda, but before security was stabilized in northern Uganda, there were no efforts. When security was stabilized, dialogue began, communities were built, and now you're in charge of your own affairs. So Uganda must be...
We are not yet.
I don't know.
Somewhere.
So Uganda must, as of now, be in Somalia to ensure that, one, gains are consolidated, institutions are built, then nation building also progresses, and we exit when we know that institutions are there but are supported and accepted by everybody, and Somalia stands.
The word that he used there was Uganda must. raises a lot of questions, but still keeping lenses on Somalia. Somalia has kept itself in the news most recently with a decision by President Hassan Mohamud to offer exclusive use of the ports to the United States government, and which may mean a lot of security guarantees for them, which then begs the question, must Uganda be continuously existing in Somalia? But of course, it's also boiling up politics around the region, and it begs the question, what are the risks that are faced with this position of Somalia, should it actually hold any water?
Yeah, I like when you use the word risk, because actually there are many risks. You see, the other thing that we need to accept, understand and accept, is that the Somalia of Mohammed Sheikh is just but Mogadishu and a few bits. Somalia is so disintegrated that even when Somalia, I look at it as diplomatic posturing. When they link up with, say, the US and offer ports, because I think the only port that is in the hands of Sheikh Ahmed is the Mogadishu port. We know that Somaliland, Hargeisa, seceded or is in the move to secede. Up to today, it has not officially been recognized by international powers as a sovereign state, but it's very much a viable state in its own right. And they seem to be, you know, what you'd call tacit diplomacy. They seem to be acceptance from Mogadishu that, well, maybe let it continue existing the way it is, and probably there are both opportunities in it and there are challenges. But the port of Berbera is with it. The port of which other port? Because I think Kismayo and Mogadishu is with Somali. Berbera, I forget the other name, the other port. But okay, so there is Somaliland, there is Puntland, there is Jubaland. All these have dissenting voices. So yes, these are good overtures in terms of bringing about regional peace, security, stability, especially over the high seas. But I think there is need to facilitate, support, and encourage Mogadishu to try and consolidate and reconcile with these blocks. Otherwise, it leaves the region volatile. You know. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that the population of Somalia, by the way, is very small, coming back to the East African community. Okay. And I think they have their own issues. First of all, it's one of those states that is almost homogeneously Muslim, you know, and also homogeneous. Of course, there are small, you'd call them ethnic groups, you know. There is the Bantu tribe, there is, but all those, and also those have their challenges. And for Somalia, I don't see the idea of modern democracy. And maybe this is where sometimes I agree with the President Museveni. I think the whole idea of looking up for a hybrid African solution, because what the NRA did as they walked into Kampala with the LC system and all that, I think has some kind of text that emerging states should look at, because the issue of
borrow not from.
Yeah, but quite borrow a few texts, because you see the whole issue of multipartism. Because like to practice multipartism in Somalia at the moment would mean that you come up with a very hybrid kind of style that actually condescends through the clan you know, through the clan levels.
All right. We'll look into the internal political matters of Somalia on another given day. As we are wrapping up this conversation, gentlemen, we still have a question on our hands for which you must find recommendations or answers from you. Regional peace and integration within the East African community. What are some of the recommendations you believe that if adopted on a block level or on a state-to-state level could actually lead us into a better position? I will allow you each a minute to give me your feedback and then we'll be able to close. I'll start with you, Kassim.
3 things. One, dialogue, intensified dialogue on issues that affect the East African community, whether security, economic, social, name it. Dialogue should be the champion.
Okay.
Number 2, accepting that no single state in East Africa can give it all alone, in terms of security, but also in terms of supporting others. Therefore, build capacity for an East African standby force, acceptable by all, and able to support and defend the security of East Africa. Thirdly, allowing the fact that East African bloc is not about politics only. It's about the improvement of the welfare and livelihoods of the people.
All right.
And how do these people be part of it to